The comic industry in the 50s and 60s were inspired and shaped by the space race and was spearheaded by the Scarlet Speedster Barry Allen. These stories were filled with exploration and sci-fi fantasies audiences grew to love, but of course in the following years, things had to change and grow. Specifically in the mid-80s, after a decade of both major superhero comic publishers going through an age of comics focused on social issues facing society like racism, drugs, corruption, and poverty, they progressed to the modern age of storytelling. Stories from this time were a lot more violent and critical of the world we inhabit. It was a departure from the Silver Age of old, and going into the 90s, both publishers knew it was time to either let the Silver Age characters vanish into comic history or turn up the leather, blood, and muscles. But the 90s, now famously dubbed the Dark Age of comics, shares striking similarities to the Silver Age. Even though this era is not dominated by space exploration or even a bright tone, what they do have in common with the Silver Age is the legacy of the characters. Barry Allen and Hal Jordan may not be direct successors to their Golden Age counterparts in universe, but to the eyes of the everyday reader, they are, and they started to connect with this version of the character. And in the 90s, the same thing occurred, but this time within the universe. The Flash mantle was passed down to Wally West. Kyle Rayner became the only and presumably last Green Lantern. Connor Hawke picked up the bow and arrow after his father passed away, and even years earlier, characters like Dick Grayson stepped out of the shadow of their mentor and adopted his own identity as Nightwing. The 90s dared to ask the question, how do you keep superheroes relevant when the world they were built for doesn't exist anymore? The answer was, of course, legacy, and this is where it truly peaked. If it's one thing the 90s are gonna do, is break some bones, kill some heroes, and add unnecessary amount of muscle mass to characters. No character was safe from the Dark Age. Superman was killed, Batman broke his back, Hal Jordan heel turned, Spider-Man was cloned, Wolverine has adamantium literally ripped out of his skeleton. The X-Men were just a mess as a whole, a good looking mess, but a mess nonetheless. What the Dark Age wanted to make clear was that the Silver Age was dead as hell, and don't try to ask for it back, because we're just gonna keep taking clothes away from your favorite characters and replace it with biker leather or change their power set as a whole. The 90s basically were not afraid to tell you to shut up and read this because they were going to try whatever they wanted. The 90s to me was headlined by its newest legacy act, Wally West. Wally, similarly to his mentor and predecessor, is the heartbeat of this new era of storytelling. Wally wasn't just the next guy up, he was the Flash of a whole generation. Barry, as I said before, was defined by the space race, and because of that, Barry was the ever curious and optimistic hero that defined the Silver Age. But contrastively, Wally was the Flash during the time of the Information Age. Everything became a little bit more known and important in the 90s, and because of this, things started to become more bold and dark, and that's perfectly reflected in a character like Wally West. His suit is darker, his body is bulkier, he as a character is very instinctual and reactionary. He is very much a person that feels everything and tries to connect with everyone, even his villains. Wally's time as the Flash started off rough, trying to fill the shoes of his late uncle and constantly comparing himself to the legend he thought he was. It wasn't until Flash 74 through Flash 79 that he was finally able to truly become the Flash in his mind, with presumably Barry Allen coming back to life and still outshining Wally in speed and in tricks like phasing. He quickly felt right at home as the sidekick of sorts, but it wasn't until Barry started to push him away for the glory and outright treat people wrongly that he knew this wasn't his Barry. But that didn't matter because this Flash was wearing his uncle's face and was just as fast as him, meaning he was leagues faster than Wally, Jay, or any other speedster, and his legacy shattering actions for the real Barry would never presumably be stopped unless Wally finally became the fastest man alive. And of course, the only man that could help with this problem was the Zen master of speed himself, Max Mercury. He was quick to diagnose Wally's problem, and it was simply that he was afraid of passing Barry, because if he did, that would make people forget Barry's heroics and his sacrifice. He took his name and costume so the world will remember his uncle, but deep down psychologically, he never wanted to be better than him. So he is in turn holding back and always overthinking. But hard-headed as he is, Wally doesn't truly accept Max's diagnosis until his girl saw him get his ass handed to him and said, maybe, this fight isn't for you, maybe you won't be able to stop him after all. And this fool truly locked in and said, fuck all that. I'm breaking sound barriers to get my get back no matter what. You're not doing that in front of my girl. Oh, also, that evil Barry Allen is just a younger Eobard that hasn't even met Barry yet. He kind of just messed up his time traveling and traveled into our future. But by the end of this story, Wally mollywops Eobard and tricks him into going back into his own time by being so fast that not even Eobard could see him get off the cosmic treadmill. Here, he truly stamped his name as the fastest man alive and the Flash of a new generation. Kyle Rayner was was introduced as the only and presumably last Green Lantern. After Hal crashed out and destroyed the whole Green Lantern Corps and became Parallax, the deck was cleared for newcomer Kyle Rayner. Guy Gardner became Warrior, John Stewart became a Dark Star. Kyle was young, creative, and optimistic, everything that Hal Jordan wasn't at this point. Most people would say that Hal's actions in Emerald Twilight were controversial and out of character for him, but a loud minority thinks it was actually perfectly in character for him at the time, and I happen to be a part of that minority. Hal is a very complicated hero, and I said hero on purpose because don't get it wrong, he has done very heroic things in his day, but that doesn't excuse him from the wrong and impulsive actions he took over and over in the 80s and early 90s. Just to list a few: leaving the Corps to be with his off again, on again, sometimes mind-controlled villain girlfriend, only for that to spiral into her turning evil again and killing the wife of John Stewart. He was jailed for 90 days because of DUI, but still operated as a Green Lantern, and just went back to his cell at night. And how could I not mention his EDP incident? These were all actions that Hal took as a character before his heel turn, and when you combine all this with the sorrow of his previous losses, his dad, his best friend Barry Allen, his girlfriend, his non-existent work life, it makes sense that he made the impulsive decision to massacre the Corps after the Guardians told him he was going to be reprimanded for creating a construct of a city after its destruction. But anyway, Hal Jordan's side quests aside, Kyle was a breath of fresh air for new and old readers. He felt like an average 90s young adult that was given a ring that could create anything he put his mind to. But it wasn't all brand new territory for Green Lantern readers, because just like Hal, Kyle would go on space adventures, team up with his buddies, and yes, even had his fair share of off again and on again relationships. I mean, shoot, his first issue introduced us to his sometimes girlfriend, and 3 issues later they literally created the term fridge, but that's a topic for a different day. Connor Hawke is in a unique position when it comes to his legacy spot, because unlike Barry and Hal, Oliver Queen was never going to be remembered for his heroism because of how small scale he was. At his funeral, the only good things they could say about him was that he was a hound and a rogue, and the ever pervasive womanizer. But hey, he was still a hero, so they cheered to that. Oliver was always gonna be remembered by his friends for just being himself, no matter what, but Connor never really got to know who his dad really was. He only spent a few short weeks with him before he died, and even in that time, the ever vigilant Oliver Queen didn't know this kid that has been admiring him all his life and stuck to his hip ever since they crossed paths was his own son. I mean, even Black Canary could tell that this was Oliver's son, and she gave him his most prized possession, a bow used by Ariel Flynn in The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938. Because ultimately, that's all Oliver wanted to be, a man of the people, a person that fights for the little guy, and is always going to be down to talk to a lady or few. And that's what Connor went on to do as Green Arrow. No JLA or Titan member knew he was even Oliver's son, so everything he did at first was just off his own strength. And what he did is something that would melt his father's leftist heart. In his first adventure, he wanted to stop a corporation, Kiever Enterprises, from building an amusement park on the land of the monastery he trained at all his life and where he met his father. He confronted Kiever while he was having his Playboy time or whatever the hell this was, and they were attacked by men wearing Jaguar costumes, presumably the man of Shama Sierra, a man who was not happy that Kiever is building an amusement park on his land. Connor strikes a deal with Kiever to handle his problem in Mexico, and in exchange he will stop his work on the monastery. On the airplane to Mexico, Connor starts to gain his dad's ability to have a woman fight over him as the flight attendants are cussing each other out just for a chance to serve him some water. And in Mexico, honestly, he should have had his brains blown out for trespassing, but instead the police there took him out for lunch and took him on as a partner. He ends up having to fight Shama, who has turned into a Jaguar god, and he honestly slapped him up quite easily. He was able to stop the amusement park from being built in Mexico and eventually the monastery. His run is filled with crossovers with Green Lantern and Flash, and also adventures where he's just helping small communities, something his dad would be all about. Even though he never really had a connection with Ali, he turned out to be a mirror image of him and carried his mantle well. The 90s to me is an empowering decade for side characters and just characters that don't get enough love, because after 60 years of existence, Robin finally got his own solo series. Not Dick, but still, this gave Tim Drake his own identity, and he really got to spread his wings as a hero in a way Dick never really could in this role. This series highlighted the intellect of Tim that a side character role in a Batman series could never do. He got his own villains, his own gadgets, and most importantly, his own ride. This run built up Tim into one of the fans' most beloved characters, one they would never kill off if they ever had the chance to. Dick also received his first series as Nightwing in Batman did much of the same thing that a Robin book would do, but bigger. Nightwing got his own city full of corrupt cops, mobsters, and endless poverty, so basically a home away from home for him. In this series, readers got to see why and how Nightwing grew out of Batman's shadow, or more so how he outshined it now. Through the series, he was able to build new relationships, mentor and influence kids in this building, and fight a war against Blockbuster, and all while being a compassionate and hopeful hero that is willing to let people in. The 90s, I think, has a unique attribute in that it gives anyone and everyone an ongoing series or miniseries. Darkhawk, Starman, Impulse, a brand new character at the time, but what I think is most impressive is Azrael. Jean Paul Valley, a character introduced to be a stand-in for Batman after Batman broke his back fighting Bane, but it turned out he was a little too dark even for the 90s and got kicked out of the role of Batman. But following that, he was able to hold down his own series for 100 issues, which is something you would never see today. Every issue forces Jean Paul to confront a piece of his own brainwashing and the constant fear that he'll slip back into the violent person he was engineered to be. Like I said before, the 90s really has a strong legacy focus, and the Teen Titans of this time had grown up and disbanded and came back later as the Titans, and for the most part weren't kids of the universe anymore. So DC started a new team with a new generation. Peter David brought together Robin, Impulse, and Superboy to create the team Young Justice. And side note, Superboy is the most 90s looking character ever. I mean, I love his design, but it's so 90s centric to me. But the series is actually really good. Nothing like the show of the same name. It centers around the characters I just named and newcomers Secret, Wonder Girl, and Arrowette, and others. This team had energy, chaos, comedy, and heart, but underneath all that was a really important shift. They represented a generation that wasn't trying to inherit someone else's legacy, because the core characters are mostly second, sometimes third generation legacy characters. They were building their own legacy for the most part. Young Justice wasn't an experiment for teen characters, it became the voice of the new DC era. The moment when the kids finally said, we're not the next Batman, Superman, or Flash. We're young and we're just us. Very corny joke, just go with it, this is in the series. The 90s for the Golden Age heroes were not a kind time for them at all. Batman had his back broken by Bane, and a massive earthquake cut off Gotham from the rest of the world and became a war zone. Superman died and came back to quickly have his power set changed to this electric blue and red body. Wonder Woman had lost her name and started wearing biker shorts and tons of leather. And in Marvel, the same type of shit occurred with their characters. If DC's 90s was defined by the people who inherited the mantles of Silver Age heroes, Marvel's 90s was defined by the franchises that became too big to fail, the X-Men. The X-Men, up until this point, was always a good selling book that already had great stories like Len Wein's Giant Size X-Men, Chris Claremont's Dark Phoenix saga, also Days of Future Past, and my personal favorite, God Loves, Man Kills. But the 90s is when they started to break into public consciousness. In 1991, Jim Lee and Chris Claremont made history by selling 8 million copies of X-Men #1, and this boosted the team to a new stratosphere. The book received many spin-off titles like X-Force, Cable, Gambit, Bishop, and Deadpool. This mutant boom even birthed the Marvel Animated Universe with X-Men the Animated Series, and what followed was even more great. The 90s X-Men was so quintessentially 90s because of how it embodied the core aspects of the era, which was its obsession with scale. The X-Men made everything bigger, bolder, and brighter, from the new cast of characters to the bold and still so colorful suits. And of course, the stories became even bigger, but in a more simpler way by just simply introducing the concept of love triangles, the most famous one being Jean Grey, Cyclops, and Logan. You can also talk about Madeline Pryor, and even the nastiness that was Rogue, Magneto, and Bishop. Even though this team and mythos is rooted in a fight against prejudice and social divide, in the 90s it was about the spectacle of the X-Men that enticed people to join in on the adventure. Their world was cosmic, mythological, and weird in the best ways. You had time-traveling messiahs, techno-organic viruses, clones, alternate dystopian timelines, brainwashed assassins, and villains who were living embodiments of evolution. The X-Men built on top of their previous decades of stories and created an era that people can only look at as mythological. The 90s was a chaotic time for the webhead. Peter's identity was tested more than ever in this era thanks to the dreaded Clone Saga. Peter was forced to confront the possibility that he might not be the quote-unquote real Spider-Man when Ben Reilly pops up and he looks exactly like Peter. This was supposed to be a straightforward story that would basically push out the main Peter to go live a happy married life with a kid with Mary Jane and have Ben Reilly continue as Spider-Man for the Marvel Universe. but it quickly tumbled into something so convoluted that people just skip it entirely, from the fake deaths to the resurrections to the pregnancies to the miscarriages, because the writers went back on their original ideas. This story was just never going to work, and it mostly defined Spider-Man's 90s era. But even though the Clone Saga takes up so much space in this era, that doesn't mean there's no good stories in this era for Spidey, because there is. I would be remiss to not mention Absolute Carnage, which captures 90s comics as a whole with how violent and loud it is in the best ways. The Child Within and Identity Crisis also came out in this time, which are great stories that feature prominent characters in Peter's life, his former best friend Harry Osborn and Mary Jane. Personally, I think Spider-Man might define this era because when they went big no matter what. And sometimes it failed tremendously, but other times they were cooking like they were Gordon Ramsay. Marvel Knights was a new imprint that was headed by Joe Quesada and Jim Palmiotti. It focused on revitalizing underutilized characters like Daredevil, Black Panther, and the Punisher, and the Inhumans. This imprint empowered the creators to go as far as they want with these characters. They did not hold back at all with their first series being Daredevil, and it opens with Matt presumably adopting this baby left at his doorstep, who everyone believes is the literal Antichrist. The other series followed the somewhat absurd plot points, but somehow root themselves in something very political and dark, and it became a treat for Marvel fans for the coming decade. This imprint proved that Marvel could still make amazing stories after going bankrupt, and kind of influenced Marvel to go all in with this creator-driven book by creating the Ultimate Universe in the early 2000s, which is a whole new universe outside of 616. When you look back at the 90s era of comics, through the leather suits, killed and resurrected legends, absurdly large muscles, and the bombastic storytelling in these books, you will see an era where legacy truly peaked. It tried to answer the same question the Silver Age once did, which was, what comes next? And they answered it the same way, with utilizing characters and legacies that have been around for ages, introducing new characters to old mantles, and finding a familial bond through a mission. This era was a definition of go big or go home. Sure, mistakes were made in the process, bankruptcies occurred, some characters were tarnished, some storylines went on for too long, but at the end of the day, this era will be remembered fondly for the new characters it introduced to us and all the stories it created. It proved that these characters and universes will truly never die if they keep innovating and creating from within. But those are only some of my thoughts on the dark age of comics. I didn't even get a chance to talk about the independent boom of the 90s with Image because this video was just getting too damn long. But what are your favorite moments from the 90s, your favorite characters, your favorite stories? Tell everyone in the comments below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you want more videos like this. Also, should I do an 80s video, a 2000s video, a 2010s video? Tell me what you think. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.